Whether it's done for the press or for personal growth, performance art can get out of hand. From graphic sexual acts to life-threatening violence, the most extreme examples tend to escape the art world and, well, just horrify the public at large. And here are 10 of the most notorious examples. Number 10. 100 Aktion by Hermann, 1998. Part of the Vienna actionist movement, Hermann Nietzsche's works are often bloody and deliberately shocking. Under the banner of his orgiastic mysteries theatre, he's enacted scenes of animal sacrifice and human torture among other earthly delights. But his magnum opus was his 6-day play of 1998. All of his earlier works were merely preparation. 100 Aktion was held at his own private castle with its sprawling grounds, sweeping vineyards and underground tunnels. Although 100 actors were involved, the genuinely occurring events of the play were performed by the audience, 500 to 1,000 guests. As well as the actors, there were 180 musicians, including an orchestra, brass bands, and tavern bands, playing a specially composed 1,595-page score. A belfry housing 5 church bells was also built for the play. Supplies included 13,000 litres of wine to produce the intoxicated, unbridled joy demanded by the score, 10,000 roses, 1,000 litres of blood, as well as dead pigs and sheep, 60 stretchers, over 10,000 metres of canvas for the painting actions of the second day, and 5,000 torches for the nighttime parades. There were also 2 military tanks brought in for the 5th day. But the shock value of the piece was not just the excess. 3 live bulls were also slaughtered in the play, 1 each on the 1st, 3rd, and 5th days. The idea was to reveal what is hidden. Sourced from an abattoir, they would have been killed anyway. As Nietzsche puts it, society killed the animals, not me. In fact, this was the point of the 6-day play, to lay bare the facts of existence, from the sublimest feelings of happiness and ecstasy to the deepest abysses, revulsion, the bestial destructive rage of the darkest inner urges. The 6-day duration alludes to the Christian creation. It wasn't all symbolism, though. Asked why participants were sometimes bound and blindfolded, Nietzsche simply replied that he likes it. Number 9. Solo Christos by Sebastian Horsley, 2000. Sebastian Horsley was a painter with a problem. He could only paint what he experienced for himself. At least that's how he rationalized his decision to get nailed to a cross in the Philippines. He wanted to paint the crucifixion. To get the experience, he traveled to the village of San Pedro Catud, where for Holy Week each year, young men are crucified with nails through the hands and feet. They're not being punished or killed. It's their way of feeling closer to God. Horsley wasn't the first foreigner to seek out crucifixion for himself. In fact, locals had already banned foreigners from participating after a Japanese man sold footage of his own crucifixion as sadomasochistic pornography. However, after much persuading and a bribe, Horsley was allowed a relatively low-key session to be documented by a photographer friend. It did not end well. Passing out from the pain, he slumped forward, breaking the straps around his wrists and arms meant to support his weight and minimize damage from the nails. The platform supporting his feet had also fallen off. Horsley plummeted to the ground as villagers ran away screaming. It was, he said later, an act of a god that he didn't believe in. Adding insult to injury was the reaction back home. Not only was the British press characteristically cruel with headlines like "Art Freak crucifies himself," but the art world was also dismissive. Number 8. Dinner, Eating People by Zhu Yu, 2000. Chinese artists Zhu Yu, like Feng Boyi and Ai Weiwei, set out to shock as a political statement. Dinner, Eating People was a series of photos showing Zhu procuring, cooking, and eating a 6-month-old human fetus, all with a look of indifference. The photos are gruesome however you look at them, but while the fetus is real, it's by no means fresh. You can see it's soaked in formalin. Even after cooking, he only pretends to bite it. Once flushed out to the web, however, the photos lost all their context. People saw them as evidence of a baby eating trend that caused the coronavirus pandemic, a clandestine Taiwanese fetus kitchen, legalized aborted fetus eating in China, and so on and so forth. Apparently pleased with the results of his experiment, Zhu went on 2 years later to a video of himself negotiating with a prostitute to let him impregnate her, then get an abortion so that he could feed the fetus to a dog, which he appears to do later in the film. What the fuck are you up to? Number 7. Seedbed by Vito Acconci, 1972. Every Wednesday and Saturday for 3 whole weeks, visitors to Sauna Bend Gallery in Soho would be forgiven for thinking that there was nothing going on. Room 8 was entirely empty. But as they descended the ramp into the room, Vito Acconci's seedbed began. "You're pushing down on my mouth," came his voice from the speakers. "I'm pressing my eyes into your hair." Hidden beneath their feet inside the ramp, the artist repeatedly masturbated. He used the sound of their movements to fuel his sexual fantasies, which he narrated into a microphone. Increasingly breathless and graphic, he would climax with words like, "I've done this for you, I've done this with you, I've done this to you." He'd then start again with the next person. The Met Museum has called it seminal work. According to them, the point was to create an intimate connection between artist and audience, even as they remained invisible to one another. Also, it was the 1970s. Number 6, Resonate, Obliterate by Ron Thay, 2011. Ron Thay's 50th birthday celebration was bound to be bloody. This is the performance artist known for his self-mutilation and bloodletting. Drawing on his Pentecostal childhood and HIV-positive status, his work has involved sacrificing, branding, stapling, penetrating, and hooking. As he puts it, he always plays either with flesh or fluid or blood in his work. And his 50th birthday was no different. Titled Resonate Obliterate, this piece saw him doing yoga inside a glass box naked, but for a long blonde wig attached to his scalp using pins. Moving in time to a futuristic soundtrack, he aggressively brushed the fake hair. Then, piling it high up to reveal his face, he removed the pins, blood flowing out like Christ in a thorn of crowns. Finally, Thay spread lubricant over his body, mixing it with the blood, plunged his fist into his rectum, and triumphantly began to laugh. After the show, he got his blood sugar back up with some birthday cake. Holy shit, dude. What are these guys up to? This is not art, my guys. Number 5, Untitled by Aliza Shvarts, 2008. Yale art student Aliza Shvarts gained instant notoriety in 2008 when news of her Untitled senior thesis leaked off campus into the press. Using semen from donors, or fabricators as she called them, she repeatedly artificially inseminated herself between the 9th and 15th days of her menstrual cycles for a year. Then, on the 28th day of each cycle, she took herbal drugs to abort pregnancy. Although she was never sure she was actually pregnant, she experienced cramps and heavy bleeding as a result. Collecting the blood, she penned a sculptural installation of her work, but once the Washington Post got wind of the story, Yale entered damage control. The university banned the sculpture and lied to the press, claiming Shvarts had hoaxed the whole thing. She had, they said, never inseminated herself for the piece. Shvarts denied their denial, and the story went viral online. In retrospect, she noted how, in absence of any tangible elements, the sculpture, video, photos, etc., the piece only exists as a narrative circulation. As for the point of her artwork, it was meant to open questions of marital and discursive reproduction. That it almost certainly did. Number 4, Untitled by Lai Thi Du Ha, 2011. Hanoi artist Lai Thi Du Ha gains notoriety for her performances exploring sexuality and taboos in Vietnam. As she put it, her work is about the control of the government's cultural censorship. In the Vietnamese press, she's the one who causes shock. In Fly Up, she stripped naked and covered herself in glue and blue feathers before performing avian movements. This piece culminated with the release of a live bird from her mouth. But it was her next work that drew the most attention. In this untitled piece, she took hot irons to a mass of pig bladders, then rubbed them over her arms, legs, and face. She then pressed the irons against her arms, attaching the bladders and blistering her skin before peeling off the burned parts. Number 3, Shoot by Chris Burden, 1971. Chris Burden was adamantly anti-war, specifically when it came to Vietnam. As a performance artist, he expressed his solidarity with victims through shocking acts of violence directed against himself. Examples include crucifixion to a Volkswagen Beetle, getting kicked down 2 flights of stairs, and confinement to a school locker with a bottle above to drink from and a bottle below to pee into. He also had an audience stick him with pins. In the piece, for what he's best well known, Shoot, he had a friend shoot him at close range with a rifle. Although at a gallery, only a few guests were present, all friends of the artist, but the moment was captured on Super 8 film. In the footage, we see and hear the gun fire, the victim stumble forward, and the shell hit the ground. The gun was off target. The bullet was only supposed to graze his arm, but instead it passed right through, forcing Burden and co. to make a hasty trip to the hospital and leave staff in disbelief at the reason. Although he might not have thought so at the time, it was actually kind of better for the piece that it caused a real wound. After all, the intention was to challenge America's desensitization to violence. Number 2, Cybele, Century Banquet by Cybele, 2012. For a brief period, on April 8, 2012, one tweet cut through the noise. Please retweet. I'm offering my male genitals, full penis, testes, scrotum, as a meal for 100,000 yen. We'll prepare and cook as the buyer requests at his chosen location. It went on to reassure readers of the quality of the meat. 22 years old and free of disease, dysfunction, or hormone treatment. This was no bot. The tweeter was Tokyo artist Cybele, HC, and this was a serious offer. In the past, they'd had their nipples removed. The idea for this testicle banquet was to raise awareness of asexual rights, and while some tried to get the grisly meal cancelled, it wasn't against the law. Cannibalism is legal in Japan, just as it is in all US states except Idaho. 5 days after the tweet, 5 diners split the bill between them, and listening to a piano recital, watched HC saute their own penis, testicles, and scrotum with button mushrooms and parsley. Having signed a waiver freeing the artist of any responsibility for adverse reactions, the diners tucked in. The verdict? Rubbery and tasteless. But that certainly wasn't the point. Number 1. Rhythm Zero by Marina Abramovich, 1974. Marina Abramovich's Rhythm Zero gets the top spot on this list, not because she went too far as the artist, but uniquely that the public went too far as her audience. In fact, she was more shocked than anyone. This cannot be said of her earlier rhythm pieces. In Rhythm 10, for instance, she performed the old gangster party trick of rapidly stabbing a knife between her fingers on the table, not stopping until she'd cut herself 20 times. In Rhythm 5, she leapt onto a flaming star-shaped platform, losing consciousness due to lack of oxygen, and had to be rescued by audience members. Then in Rhythms 2 and 4, she lost consciousness again, this time on purpose, first with drugs, then with hyperventilation. Rhythm 0 was a different beast entirely. When the audience entered the space, they found Abramovich stood passively by a long table on which she had arranged 72 objects. Some were for pleasure, perfume, grapes, wine, and some were for pain, whip, needle, razor blades, while others were ambiguous or neutral, newspaper, paint, lipstick. Some objects implicitly invited injury. But the most shocking objects were the bullet and gun. The written instructions were simple. There are 72 objects on the table that one can use on me as desired. I am the object. During this period, I take full responsibility. Abramovich's work was all about testing her limits, but here, she was testing her audience. She wanted to see how far they would go. At first, they were playful, but they became more aggressive. It was 6 hours of real horror, she recalled. Someone cut her clothes. Someone stuck thorns into her belly. Another picked up a knife and cut her close to her neck, drinking the blood before applying the band-aid. Someone even picked her up, by now half naked, and carried her around the room, dumping her on the table. They stabbed the knife into the wood between her legs. Eventually, someone loaded the gun and aimed it at her head. They put in my hand, she remembered, to see if I were pressing it. Her hand against my hand. If I would resist. As with some of her other works, it took someone else to stop the piece for her. When the gallerist entered and said it was finished, Abramovich came to as if from a trance. Naked and bleeding with tears in her eyes, she walked through the audience and they all ran away. Literally, ran out of the door. When she returned to her hotel that evening and looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a really big piece of white hair.